Jeremy had been driving home from a long day at work, taking what he thought would be a quicker back road. But the storm had other plans. The rain poured relentlessly, and his GPS had lost signal an hour ago, leaving him navigating blindly. The winding road seemed endless, his fuel gauge inching closer to empty, and the dense forest pressing in on both sides made the isolation suffocating. When the road forked unexpectedly, he chose the left path, hoping it would lead somewhere, anywhere. For miles, the trees closed in tighter, the storm growing louder, until a faint light pierced through the rain. Up ahead, a neon sign glowed faintly. The last round, the bar sat alone in the woods, its weathered exterior illuminated by the flickering sign. The sound of muffled laughter and clinking glasses drifted out, a strange comfort in the middle of nowhere. Relieved, Jeremy parked his car and dashed through the rain. The old building had an odd charm, worn wood and neon light that pulsed faintly, almost alive. He pushed open the door, stepping into the warmth. Inside, the place was lively, people laughing, chatting, and raising their glasses. The bartender, a tall man with slicked back hair and an easy grin, waved him over. "Rough night?" the bartender asked, his voice carrying easily over the hum of conversation. "You could say that," Jeremy replied with a tired smile, shrugging off his soaked jacket. "But turned around in this storm, and my car's running on fumes. Yeah, these back roads can do that to you," the bartender said, sliding a napkin across the counter. "But you're in luck. Nothing a drink and a little help can't fix." Jeremy chuckled softly. "Honestly, I'm more worried about getting fuel. Don't suppose you know anyone who might have a gas can or something?" The bartender nodded, his grin widening. "Actually, we're in the right place. Local handyman's here tonight. Name's Lucas. If anyone can help you out, it's him." He gestured toward the back of the bar. "Should be in the restroom. Give it a minute, and I'll point him your way." "Thanks," Jeremy said, relieved. "I owe you one." "First round's on the house," the bartender said with a wink, already reaching for a glass. Jeremy settled in at the bar, his eyes drifting to the crowd. The lively chatter and clinking of glasses felt comforting, but his thoughts kept returning to his car. The storm outside raged, and his fuel gauge seemed to mock him. He glanced at his watch. It had been over 10 minutes since the bartender had mentioned Lucas. He shifted in his seat, feeling the weight of the quiet impatience starting to settle in. "Is the handyman still in there?" Jeremy asked, nodding toward the restroom door. The bartender glanced toward the hallway and then shrugged. "He's probably just busy. Go check on him. Maybe he's already left." Jeremy stood up, stretching, the warm air of the bar suddenly feeling too heavy. He walked to the back of the room, the silence feeling oddly thick, as if the laughter and chatter had muffled in his ears. The hallway to the restroom was dim, and as he approached, he noticed the light flickering in the narrow corridor. He reached for the door, hesitated, and knocked lightly. No answer. Pushing the door open slightly, he peered inside. The restroom was empty. There was no sign of Lucas, just the usual fixtures, a flickering fluorescent light above the sink, and the faint smell of stale air. Confused, Jeremy stood there for a moment, unsure whether to leave or check elsewhere. After a few seconds of silence, he exhaled and turned back toward the bar, his footsteps echoing softly in the hall. When he entered the main room again, something felt wrong. The chatter and laughter that had filled the space before had all but vanished. The bar was eerily silent now, the music barely audible. The tables that had been crowded with people were now empty. Jeremy's eyes scanned the room. No one. The only person left was the bartender, still polishing glasses behind the bar, his movements slow and deliberate, as if he hadn't noticed the sudden shift in atmosphere. Jeremy felt his throat tighten. He swallowed hard, unsure if he had imagined the sudden silence or if it was real. "Hey," he called out, his voice sounding unusually loud in the quiet space. The bartender looked up, his smile still present but colder now, almost mechanical. "Something wrong, friend?" Jeremy glanced around again. Still no sign of anyone else. Where did everybody go? The bartender's gaze lingered on him for a moment. Then he shrugged. "Guess they all had to head out. A quiet night, huh?" He slid the glass he was polishing into place with an unnatural precision. Jeremy's pulse quickened, but he forced himself to stay calm. "It's strange, though. There were a lot of people here just a minute ago." The bartender simply nodded, his smile stretching slightly. "Sometimes people just leave. You're the last one here." "What about Lucas?" Jeremy asked again, his voice wavering. The bartender gave a small chuckle, wiping the last remnants of the glass clean with a towel before setting it down. His gaze locked onto Jeremy's. "Don't worry about Lucas. He'll be back soon enough. In the meantime..." The bartender's smile returned, but it was sharp, predatory. "Why don't you sit by the bar and play a quick game with me? It'll pass the time until he shows up." Jeremy felt a cold shiver run down his spine, but before he could protest, the bartender gestured to an empty stool at the counter. Reluctantly, Jeremy moved toward it, taking a seat, his hands still clammy with nervousness. The bartender leaned forward, his voice suddenly quieter. "It's simple. I'll offer you 3 choices and you pick one. Whatever you choose, we'll move on to the next. No backing out. You'll see how it goes." Jeremy's heart began to race, but he forced himself to nod. "What's the catch?" The bartender's grin widened, revealing just a bit too much of his teeth. "There's no catch. Just a little game to pass the time, like I said." He took a breath, then laid out the first option. "First," the bartender said, his eyes glinting with something almost unholy, "you can drink the glass in front of you." He slid a dusty glass across the counter toward Jeremy, its contents dark and thick. "It'll leave you feeling a certain way, but I warn you, you may not like it." Jeremy hesitated. There was something about the drink that didn't sit right with him, but he wasn't sure if it was his growing paranoia or something more. The bartender continued, without missing a beat. "Second, you can leave right now. You'll walk back out into that storm, but you'll never find your way home. The woods are a maze, and the road you took here doesn't exist anymore." Jeremy's throat went dry. The words hit him with a strange finality, the warning too unsettling to ignore. "And the third," the bartender said with a slow smile, "is you stay here, sit back, and let me pick for you. I'll choose something for you to do, something unforgettable." Jeremy could feel his mind racing, his pulse pounding in his ears. He had no idea what was happening, but everything about the situation screamed wrong. "So," the bartender asked again, his tone expectant, "what will it be?" Jeremy felt a surge of panic, the bartender's eerie smile almost too much to bear. His heart raced, but in that moment a decision came to him. He couldn't stay here any longer. Whatever game the bartender was playing, he wasn't about to be a part of it. "I'm leaving," Jeremy said, his voice shaky but firm. "You're crazy." Without waiting for the bartender's response, Jeremy bolted from his seat, heading straight for the door. His mind screamed for him to just get out of there, away from whatever strange, twisted situation he had found himself in. As he pushed open the door and stepped out into the cold, the rain hit him like a slap to the face. The storm still raged, but Jeremy barely noticed. His legs carried him down the steps, his thoughts consumed by the unnerving experience inside the bar. But then, as he was about to make his way back to his car, he froze. A man was walking toward him, carrying a large, worn toolbox in one hand. The man's expression was unreadable, his face weathered and tired, his clothes soaked by the rain. Jeremy squinted through the downpour. "Are you Lucas?" he called out, his voice uncertain but desperate for an answer. The man stopped in his tracks, a slight pause before he nodded. "That's me." Jeremy's eyes widened in disbelief. This was the handyman the bartender had been talking about, the one who was supposed to help him with his car. The man set the toolbox down with a heavy thud, looking Jeremy over for a moment. "Looks like you could use some help," Lucas said, his voice gravelly but calm. Jeremy, still trying to process everything, nodded. "Yeah, my car's out of gas. I need to get back on the road." "Don't worry," Lucas said, giving him a small smile. "I've got a jerry can in my truck. I'll fill you up." Jeremy watched as Lucas went to his truck parked just down the road. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about the whole situation, but at least Lucas seemed like a straightforward guy, not like the strange bartender inside. A few minutes later, Lucas returned with the jerry can, and after a few quiet moments, he had Jeremy's car filled up. "There you go," Lucas said, wiping his hands on his jacket. "You should be good now." Jeremy thanked him and climbed into his car, the engine sputtering to life. He was about to drive off when something made him pause. He turned to look at Lucas, who was standing by the side of the road watching him. "Hey, do you know anything about that bar?" Jeremy asked, feeling the weight of his curiosity pulling at him. Lucas's expression flickered for a brief moment, and he shook his head slowly. "I've been out here long enough to know that some places are best left alone," he said cryptically, before turning away and heading back toward his truck. Jeremy's stomach churned, but he had no time to dwell on it. He put the car in gear and drove off, the bar growing smaller in his rearview mirror. As he drove away, the feeling of unease didn't quite fade, but at least now he had fuel to keep moving forward. Still, in the back of his mind, Jeremy couldn't shake the thought that maybe the storm wasn't the only thing that had led him down that road tonight. As Jeremy drove home, the rain continued to beat down, the windshield wipers working furiously to keep the glass clear. His mind raced, replaying every moment he'd spent inside that strange bar. He couldn't shake the unease that had settled in his chest. The bartender's cryptic words, the empty room, and Lucas' strange presence, it all felt too surreal. But as the miles passed and the bar faded from view, a strange sense of relief washed over him. He was almost home. Finally, the familiar sight of his house came into view. Jeremy pulled into the driveway, relieved to be back in the comfort of his own space. His hand trembled slightly as he grabbed his keys, still unsettled by everything that had happened. He stepped out of the car and walked toward the front door, the storm still raging around him. His hand grasped the cold brass doorknob, and with a deep breath, he turned it. The door creaked open, but as soon as it did, something stopped him dead in his tracks. The unmistakable sound of muffled laughter echoed from within, followed by the clinking of glasses. Jeremy froze, his heart leaping in his chest. He hadn't been gone long enough for anyone to be inside his house, let alone a full group of people. His instincts screamed for him to turn around, to run, but his legs wouldn't move. He took a cautious step inside, the laughter growing louder as he moved further into the house. And then he saw it. There, standing behind his kitchen counter, was a bartender, the same bartender from the bar. His white shirt was still spotless, his apron crisp, and his smile, wide and knowing, was just as unsettling as it had been earlier. "Are we gonna finish our game?" the bartender asked, his voice smooth but laced with an eerie calm. He blinked, thinking it was a hallucination, some strange twist of his own mind from the odd encounter at the bar. But no, the bartender was still standing there, polished glasses in hand, waiting patiently for an answer. "What's going on?" Jeremy whispered, his voice hoarse. The bartender tilted his head, his smile never faltering. "You made your choice, Jeremy. You never really left. What do you want from me?" Jeremy's voice cracked, desperation creeping into his tone. The bartender's smile widened. "You made a choice, Jeremy. You didn't think the game was over, did you?" Jeremy's hand trembled as he backed toward the door, but as he looked down at the handle, he realized it was no longer his front door. It was a dark, warped version of it, twisted and unfamiliar. The house wasn't his anymore. Nothing was. His pulse pounded in his ears as he looked around, the dim light in the room casting long, unnatural shadows. He could still hear the clinking of glasses, feel the laughter crawling under his skin. Suddenly, the laughter stopped. The silence was deafening, and for a moment everything seemed to freeze. "I gave you choices," the bartender said, his voice low now, almost a whisper. "You chose to leave, but you never really left. You're here, with us, and now you'll stay." He raised his glass, the dark liquid inside swirling eerily. "You're part of the game now, Jeremy." The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. His stomach churned, nausea rising in his throat. He tried to move, tried to break free, but his body wouldn't obey. It was like the house itself was holding him captive, pulling him into the web of the game. The bartender's eyes gleamed with something predatory, something that wasn't human. With a sudden bone-chilling certainty, Jeremy knew he would never leave. The storm outside, the twisted bar, and the bartender. It was all a trap, an endless loop, and he was trapped in it now. There was no escaping. The bartender set down his glass and motioned to the empty stool next to him. "Sit, Jeremy. We're just getting started." And as Jeremy felt himself compelled to sit, he realized he was no longer in control. His life had become part of the game, and there was no turning back. The last thing he heard as his vision blurred was the bartender's voice, soft and cold. "Welcome back.